Hello, welcome to episode 18 of the Halo 2 analysis series. Today we're going to be briefly summarizing all the major changes in Halo 2's story from the original cut storyboards. And for those that aren't aware, the development process for this game was absolutely brutal, requiring significant amounts of crunch and an entire third of the campaign being removed, so Bungie just could merely make the shipping date. If you want every single detail on the cut story in a beautifully animated format, I highly encourage you to check out C3 Sabretooth's series on the Cut Halo 2 storyboards, which I'll link in the description, of course. And massive thanks to it. It provided a valuable resource when researching for this video. So in most versions of the original story, everything up until the end of Cairo Station would play out similarly, if not outright identically, to what we got in the final release. But the first divergence is a somewhat controversial one that was discovered by fans. So this subplot would have seen Miranda Keyes betray the Chief, make a deal with the Prophets, and strap a bomb to Chief's armor. Yeah, it's easy to see why this would have been controversial, especially when viewed in isolation. This original plotline seems absolutely absurd. However, when we take the context of Halo 2's storyline as a whole into account, it can slightly make sense. Hear me out. It's clear from the very first to the very last cutscene in the game that the parallels and differences between Chief versus the Arbiter is really what's at the core of Halo 2's narrative, right? Outside of defending Cairo Station, which was the introductory level basically, this Miranda betrayal of Chief would have happened on Chief's first mission after leaving the awards ceremony, making this a potential one-way mission very early on for him. Meanwhile, after his torture scene, which was literally paralleled with Chief in the intro cutscenes, Arbiter on his first mission is told explicitly that he is not expected to survive this mission. In other words, after all of his service in the past, the Arbiter's higher-ups are selling him out and sending him on what are perceived as certain death missions. Much akin to how in this cut subplot, Miranda would have sold out and betrayed the Chief despite all of his service to the UNSC. In fact, the parallels run even further, as in both cases the leadership is knowingly selling out who is widely recognized as the best individual warriors in their individual militaries. Thus, they're both seemingly willing to weaken themselves merely just to betray one of the most accomplished warriors of each faction. And by the way, this would have taken place during the famous cut level Covenant ship, which would have seen Chief boarding the Covenant ship as he destroys it in the cutscene after Cairo Station, and you would have destroyed it far more manually than in a cutscene. Although I must admit, that cutscene's pretty cool, so that's a pretty fair way to repay us for getting that mission cut, I say. While the two Heretic missions as the Arbiter would have had similar plots, there would have been some significant environmental changes. Firstly, the Heretics were originally stationed on Basis, the largest moon orbiting the gas giant which the first Halo ring orbited. And the second change is while Burial Mounds, which is one of Halo 2's multiplayer maps, see one of the previous videos in the series talking about the multiplayer, that's in the final product and is said to be on Basis, but they depict it as arid and desert-like, when originally it would have looked far more frigid and lunar according to all art and descriptions. And several missions later in the original Arbiter storyline, the Index scene would have also played out not just somewhat differently, but outright antithetically of what we got in the final release in many ways. In this version, the Great Schism has already started by the time the Arbiter reaches the room where the Index was, and the UNSC just straight up got to the Index first and retrieved it. So Arbiter, having failed to secure the Index in this scenario, but still looking to regain the Prophet's favor, chases them down in an attempt to revive it. But just as the Arbiter eventually catches up with them and starts fighting them, they're eventually surrounded by Tartarus's forces, which causes everybody to pause, who are then subsequently interrupted by some megafauna cyclops thing living on the ring, which then is obviously eventually killed by the brutes and collapses. But that's not the end of the chain reaction though, as then the cyclops falls through the platform that the Arbiter and Chief were standing on, breaking it and sending them down into the ring's underground. They don't end up having their Gravemind group intervention sort of thing until after both characters explore the underground and stumble independently onto the Gravemind. Foreigner's ship was supposed to be the cut level that would have gotten the Chief from where he fell to the Gravemind, but almost none of that mission was seemingly ever fleshed out, so I don't really have much to tell you about that one. Much like in the final game, the Gravemind would send Arbiter to the control room area, and Chief would go into High Charity itself. However, the Foreigner key ship section at the end of the missions on High Charity for Chief would have varied a bit, particularly aesthetically, given this version of the story was far less subtle about suggesting the Foreigners were ancient humans, and we'll get to that even more so later. The key ship originally had just a blatantly far more UNSC/human design motive. Just look at it here. And then finally getting to the cut third act, and while Chief would still return to Earth after the High Charity stuff in this scenario, he'd be returning to the Covenant, unearthing the Ark itself on Earth, rather than merely a portal to it like we got in Halo 3's story. So upon reaching it after landing, or the area at least, not the Ark yet, the Chief would fly around in a Phantom with Johnson and Miranda looking for an entrance into the Ark, only for the Arbiter to beat them to it, all on his lonesome. And then being ahead of Chief, the Arbiter would ultimately get to the Prophet of Truth first, rather than with him simultaneously like we got in Halo 3. We actually have audio for most of this exchange with Truth, actually, in this version, and in my humble opinion, this dialogue would have been even more impactful than the iconic moments we got in Halo 3's version of the Arbiter confronting Truth. Again, full thanks to C3 Sabretooth for this audio. This is taken directly from his recreation of that moment, so play that.
Can you see, Arbiter? The moment of salvation is at hand.
It will not last.
Now kort hvile på vent. Det setter på deres sannere du er. For simmer hvile på vent. Your kind never believed in the promise of the sacred rings.
And which promise is that? That the great journey is for all of us? That the Prophet shall lead us in good faith? That the elites shall make the galaxy a graveyard and never ask why or wherefore?
Så for dem skærker var det for. I'm not sure yet. Dem precis out of his.
You knew all along what Halo would do. How many would die?
Så der bliver jeg nu, den ikke sammen.
One. Unwashed.
Following Truth's defeat, Chief deactivates the array from the Ark, causing the Ark to begin collapsing after the shutting down of the firing sequences of the rings. Ultimately, the Chief and the Arbiter split up, with the Arbiter pursuing Guilty Spark further into the underground as everything is collapsing around them, and he eventually does catch up with Spark in some sort of chamber with a coffin in the middle, with a bunch of data streaming and all sorts of stuff, and when peeling back the top of the coffin, the Arbiter is stunned to see nothing less than a full-on human skeleton, which Guilty Spark affirms is a Forerunner. Even I, as someone who prefers the Forerunners and humans being separate species, on a narrative level, broadly speaking, must concede that this would have made the entirety of the original Covenant War storyline even more fantastic on a narrative level than what we got from the original trilogy, which, quite frankly, I thought was impossible.
Oracle! This is a Forerunner. Oh, that is impossible. It cannot be.
Yes, it is. Like the festival, I should make no derived business, no sit.
Hopefully you all enjoyed this brief overview of the cut content. The next video in this series is either going to be about the art style of Halo 2 or the analysis of all the Halo 2 cutscenes, the original Halo 2 cutscenes. Both scripts are about halfway done, so I'm unsure as to which I will be inspired to finish first yet, but you'll see it and find out, I guess. Love you all, and have a good day.